This is Duke University.
This week on Office Hours. Duke students have sought to serve people on campus and in the community in a variety of ways, from Habitat for Humanity blitzes to creating after-school programs for children in Durham. The inspiration behind dozens of these service initiatives has been Duke professor Thome Brown. He has taught courses on social entrepreneurship and leadership at the Sanford School of Public Policy for 15 years, challenging his students to reflect on their values and then take action. This semester, Brown is teaching a course on developing moral courage. Brown joins us today to take your questions on leadership, service, and entrepreneurship.
Hello, and welcome to Office Hours at Duke University. I'm Taylor Clarke, a senior at Duke. Today I'm here with Professor Thome Brown, the co-director of the Heart Leadership Program and founder of the Enterprising Leadership Initiative at Duke. Hi, Thome.
Hi, how are you, Taylor?
Great, thank you. Thome, this semester you're teaching a class called Moral Courage. Now I'm curious, what led you to develop this course? Was it the belief that discussion about ethics like this could change campus culture at Duke, or is it more of a desire to raise awareness about moral courage for any endeavor?
Well, actually, the title of the course is Leadership and Moral Courage, and I'm really interested in what I would call enterprising leadership, which is how students go about making things happen. And it seems to me that moral development is a college outcome and that there's a ripe opportunity for Duke students to think about what they could do to contribute to the culture at Duke with regard to moral development.
In your class syllabus for the Moral Courage class, you ask a question that's meant for reflection throughout the semester, and let me ask it now. Can students make small, enterprising contributions to the outgoing work of administrators and student leaders in a way that contributes to Duke students' sense of community, empathy, and strong moral code? Can you share some of the projects in the pipeline that your class is working on to address this question?
Sure. So the first time I taught the course was in the spring of 2011. The students came up with a number of individual initiatives. This semester, we're working on two additional models. One is to have student teams work with college administrators who are actively engaged in activities that we would classify as building empathy and community at Duke. And second, to learn about the possibility of a number of small group conversations, a large number of conversations actually, in which students would be stimulated to reflect on some questions about Duke values and Duke culture.
Let's take a question from the audience. Jack emailed in a question. Over the past few years, our country's political system has seemed dysfunctional, if not toxic. You work with talented and idealistic young people, Thome, and I'm guessing that you'd encourage some of them to get involved with politics to help improve the situation. But isn't it more likely that they'll just get chewed up in the process? How do you train students to keep hope alive in the face of long odds, whether in the political arena or elsewhere?
So that's a big question. So my work is about enterprising activity. What could people do in some small way that's creative, that reflects imagination and initiative to make the world a better place? And everything we do is built around asking that question. What could we do to make a difference? And that could include politics, it could include social entrepreneurship, it could include civic engagement, it could include moral development at Duke. And so the whole idea is that students would come out of this with a sense of empowerment. You know, we use the words agency, efficacy, and identity to see themselves as people that could actually act in some small ways to contribute to the world.
Sure. You know, you've been teaching for many years. If I could ask, what is one lesson that you wish to impart on students that you hope that they'll remember for years to come? Is it this idea of empowerment and agency? Well,
it's the idea of reaching out beyond yourself to do something, no matter how small, that can make the world a better place. And that it's about being action-oriented and then reflective and learning from it. But I think people and students, they feel a sense of power when they accomplish something. And it doesn't have to be big, but it has to be something.
Well, with that said, let's hear from some of Thome's former students.
I think it's something I always keep in the back of my mind, whether it's career choices and picking a career. For me, it's in healthcare, where I think I'm able to make a difference, and even at the individual company level, trying to identify areas where we can make a positive impact on the community. So it's certainly a class that stayed with me. I feel really lucky to have had Thome as a professor.
if I go to Tony and say, in my current job, I'm on the fast track to success and status, and I'm worried that if I take this job that's being offered to me at a different organization that I'm super interested in, I'm worried I'll get off the fast track. Tony will look back at me and say, what is this fast track? What does it mean to you? And where are you trying to go on a fast track? That then forces me to define success based on my own values and define where I'm going.
I think about it in two ways. One, I have two children, and I think a lot about how I want to be a quote-unquote leader for them. And that's really around thinking about what values I want to instill on them. And that's a pretty active conversation in my life. And I think that all stemmed in some ways back from when I took a class with Tony. And secondly, I guess in job path and job decisions, I've had a couple alternatives or forks in the road, and I've taken a path that I feel is it's been a little bit harder at times, but is more aligned with my core values in trying to help others. And I'm not sure I'd be in this particular line of work were it not for Tony and starting to have those conversations with him and the conversations we had in his class.
Tony, it's clear that you develop very close relationships with your students. You know,
Yes.
in your role as the former executive director of the Robertson Scholars Program, I remember you taught a first-year colloquium. And
That's
as a
correct.
Robertson Scholar, one of my fondest memories from the colloquium was when you invited us to your home and to meet your wife, Teddy. And so I smiled when I saw on the syllabus for your Moral Courage class this semester that you were hosting a similar get-together at your home. How important is it for you to have students see you in your home element?
Well, first they have to meet my wife, Teddy, because you don't understand me unless you get to know my wife, Teddy. And Teddy worked with me for 6 years before she retired. But my teaching model is based on what I learned as an organizational leader. And if you look at what I do, it's very similar to what I would do if I were taking over a new organization. And one of the first things you want to do is you want to build personal relationships. So it's not rocket science to me to say if we really want to build a great class community, and if I say to the class, we aspire for this to be a great course and only you can make it great, you have to be a great class community to get to know them at my house, outside of the office, where they get to know each other is a hugely important step.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about building great organizations, we have a question from Swati, who wrote in via email: can a leader be made, or is a leader born a leader?
Yeah. Well, I don't use the word leader very much. I use the word leadership, because the question is whether leadership is the behavior of the leader or is it the behavior of the group. And I believe it's the behavior of the group. So I really think that groups exercise leadership, and they always have a leader, but groups exercise leadership, and anybody can increase their ability to contribute to leadership. So the question is, could a walk-on basketball player exercise leadership for the men or women's basketball team? And the answer is, of course they could, by how they conduct themselves in practice and things like that. So if you can imagine an organization where every student or every member is thinking about ways that they can exercise leadership to contribute to the greater good, you can have powerful results.
Mm-hmm. You teach courses for the Heart Leadership Program's Enterprising Leadership Initiative, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And in fact, one of them, called Social Entrepreneurship in Action, just won a National Innovation Award.
Yes.
You were one of 6 award winners selected from 80 nominations. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about that course?
Well, this is a course that I created about 10 years ago, and it's a social entrepreneurship course, not just a social entrepreneurship education course, because the outcomes of that course are real social initiatives. So students in that course, they move from an idea to a promising idea to a credible idea to a compelling idea to action. Then they pilot test in the subsequent semester, and then they join our incubator and they launch it. So students have done amazing things. I not only believe in preparing students to contribute to the world after they graduate, but I think students can contribute to the world while they're in school. And in the process, they create signature learning and developmental experiences for themselves.
Mm-hmm. From what I understand and what you just told us, you want your passion is to help students actually act on their beliefs in the real world. Can you talk about some of the real organizations that have been built based on projects started in your own classes?
Oh, sure. On campus, it would be Small Town Records, Common Ground, Center for Race Relations, the Durham Giving Project, Arts Connect. In Durham, it would be Student U, Crayons to Calculators, Camp Kesem. This weekend we were at a Habitat house kickoff, and next to it was the Youth United Build for Habitat. It's their 6th house, and my students started that 4 years ago, and so it made me feel great. So there's a lot of examples.
On your syllabus for your social entrepreneurship class, you wrote a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. And in light of all these organizations that have been built based on your projects, along the way, there's certainly been successes, but there had to have been failures at some point.
Sure.
How do you teach failure? How do you go about, more importantly, maybe teaching how to deal with failure, whether it's a personal failure, a business failure, a project failure? How do you go about teaching that?
Well, there's a huge difference, in my opinion, between defeat and failure. And if you just think of any athletic team, just because you lost a game doesn't mean you're a failure. So first thing with a lot of Duke students, you have to get out of their mind that a defeat is the same as failure. So when something doesn't work, you have to figure out why it didn't work. You want to learn from it. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur, then you recalibrate and you figure out a way to make it work. So I'm a great believer in get ready, go, get set. You do some preparation, you get into an action mode, you have a defeat, or I call it a speed bump. You hit a speed bump and you rethink what's gone on and you recalibrate, then you go and get back in the game. And that's what I mean by enterprising leadership.
And when you talk about recalibrating and getting back into the game, what part does reflection play in that process?
Well, you have to take it in. So if you believe that you have to be perfect, you tend to be Teflon-like and siphon off if you have a problem to other people. So the first thing you have to do is you've got to take it in, and you've got to say, what could I have done differently? And you've got to figure out how to act on it. So reflection is huge.
Mm-hmm. Shifting gears a little bit, we've got another question from the audience. Greg asks, as a leadership professor, what leadership advice would you give our 2012 presidential hopefuls?
Oh, that's I'm a believer in context and the alignment of context and the needs of the situation and the group and the present and the leader. And so in this case, the context is very, very challenging, and with the divided ideologies that we have. So I think there's if I were designing a leadership plan for the presidential hopefuls, I think there'd be a key decision to make as to whether we need vision and inspiration, or someone who has very strong operational skills and operating skills and knows how to get things done, maybe a Lyndon Johnson kind of president.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that you don't believe in necessarily the word leader, but instead leadership.
Right.
However, are there any leaders that you do particularly admire?
Oh, yeah, but I admire them all in context. Mm-hmm. So it could range from Coach K to my mother-in-law, who passed away last spring. And it's people that have overcome challenges and demonstrated an ability to get something done in collaboration with other people, because that's what leadership really is.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular person that's influenced your leadership philosophies?
I probably have had 3 mentors in my life. They all played a different role. One helped me a lot with tactics about how to be effective in organizations. One helped me a lot with personal planning, and one actually always challenged me to take the high road. And the combination of those 3 mentors, long-term planning, tactics, and taking the high road, had a profound effect on my development.
Mm-hmm. So how important do you think are mentors then? For younger students in particular, how do they seek out mentors? What do they look for in a good mentor? And how important is it for them to find one?
Well, I think it's hugely important because the literature in college, and those mentors could be fellow students, you learn from other people. You don't just learn from yourself, and you don't learn just in an academic course. And I'm a great believer that the mentoree is what's really important, that you've got to help people learn how to develop relationships with others in a way that eventually becomes a mentoring relationship. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a great believer in mentoring programs or big brothers, big sisters kinds of programs. But you've got to help new students learn how to navigate a sometimes scary landscape and develop relationships with faculty members and administrators and older students.
Mm-hmm. Another question from an audience member: has Durham proven to be a good incubator for students' new business ideas? I mean, it sounds like it from what you were describing. The
Yeah, I
many
think so.
projects
Yeah,
far.
of course, my students they don't have to be nonprofit initiatives, but they're all social initiatives. This is a social entrepreneurship class, so I don't really do anything with commercial entrepreneurship. But my work, if I didn't have Durham, it wouldn't work. If we were in the middle of a field someplace, if Duke were, it wouldn't work. And my students, if we didn't have the support of the Duke administration at the highest level and in the Duke-Durham partnership, it wouldn't work. So the context is important. There are a lot of support mechanisms that help students really accomplish great things.
Mm-hmm. Shifting gears a little bit, can you give us a bit of insight into the evolution of Tony Brown? I mean, how did you realize that social entrepreneurship is what you were passionate about teaching?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. So I came to Duke after a career in the corporate sector at age 50, and I came to teach one course, and it was the most thrilling thing I'd ever done in my life. So I stayed, and we went home and quit our jobs and gave our kids our forward-in address and bought a house here and moved. And the passion really is not around social entrepreneurship, because I'm also passionate about moral development, and I'm passionate about enterprising leadership. The passion is about helping students act to contribute to the world and develop from the process. Students, when they do something amazing, it affects their outlook. Then they say, oh, I can do this.
There seems to be a strong emphasis on innovation in some of the classes in your curriculum, with the use of innovative teaching methods and also just innovative projects. Right. Do you agree with Albert Einstein that perhaps imagination can be more important than knowledge?
Well, I think imagination is huge. I think imagination, though, I'm a believer with Peter Drucker's work, that imagination and innovation come out of hard analysis and hard work. So you've got to really become very rigorous at defining the problem, defining the unmet need. Markets are pretty efficient in this country. And once you lock on to a problem that you can actually do something about, an imaginative answer is really, can be very important.
Mm-hmm. A Duke trustee that I greatly admire, David Rubenstein, once said in a talk to students that if you want to be a leader and persuade people to follow you, you need to perfect your speaking and writing abilities. And with that said, a cornerstone of the skills your classes seem to be teaching are writing proposals, and compelling plans. So can you talk about the importance of that skill?
Well, I mean, students can do amazing things. They have to build credibility, especially in the community. And one of the ways they can build credibility is if they don't just come up with sort of a harebrained idea, but if they can go see somebody and through their written papers and through their verbal communications, they can articulate a problem and a solution and incremental outcomes. So I don't think that's just an issue for a leader. I think it's an issue for anybody who wants to exercise leadership. Mm-hmm. You've got to you present yourself as somebody who's pretty clear-headed about what you're trying to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular moment of clarity or an epiphany that occurred to you when you recognized that this model of teaching, this enterprising leadership initiative model of teaching, could change the world?
Well, I like to under-promise and over-deliver, so I don't know if I want to change the world. Mm-hmm. But in my very first class on social entrepreneurship, it was probably 2001, and I had sort of a business planning model. And I had three students, Brian McGinnis, Adam Grossman, and Jared Weinstein came to me and they said, we'd like to do something about the lack of Little League fields in Eastern Durham. Could we make this a real project? And I said, sure. And to make a long story short, they ended up raising $500,000. They built 2 lighted Little League fields. And that's when I said, we can work on real ideas. It's not a theoretical business planning class. Let's do something real. Mm-hmm.
So speaking of business, you came from the business world, and now you're in the teaching world. How do you use what what you learned in your former career to inform what you do now?
Well, again, I think I use it all the time. Mm-hmm. Almost anything I do, which might be viewed as different here, is aligned with my business world. So I invest time to have my students get to know each other. I'm not course, but your greatest experience. I'm not embarrassed to say only you can make it great. These are all things I'd say to a new organization of mine. I hand out the syllabus in the second or third week of the semester, because if you're going to take over a new organization, you wouldn't hand out the strategic plan in the first day. You'd want to get the input from the students. I do get input from students about how's the course going, what's your best idea, what's your best wild idea. And so I give very honest feedback, and I solicit very honest feedback from them. So a lot of these things are natural things I would do in my prior career.
Mm-hmm. And students seem to be very receptive to that.
They do respond.
Yeah.
They do respond. They respond to honesty. Mm-hmm. They do respond.
Duke has been acknowledged by the Ashoka Foundation as one of the top U.S. universities for social entrepreneurship. Yeah. In a presentation at the Dalton Institute on College Values concerning undergraduate social entrepreneurship at Duke, you said, while there's evidence of strong student interest, the evidence of an undergraduate movement at Duke is limited.
Yes.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I think, again, it depends on whether you're talking about social entrepreneurship, education, or social entrepreneurship. If social entrepreneurship is defined, I think I would argue that most new social ventures are started by people after they graduate and in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And so to have an expectation that there's going to be a movement of undergraduate and graduate students starting new social ventures, and then they leave and they have to turn over the leadership to somebody else after they graduate, I think it's just not a realistic notion. So I just don't like the word movement. I think it's too strong a word for social entrepreneurship. I think there's strong student demand for social entrepreneurship education.
Mm-hmm. Another course you teach is called 20-something leadership. Can you tell us about the inspiration for that course and what you do in that course?
Well, I found that in the first place, I'm always looking for ways to stay engaged in the lives of my alumni. Mm-hmm. My alumni are very special to me, and I've got 1,700 of them, and so it's very important to me on that. And I found that actually with the Robertson Scholars Program, that if we were serious about our developmental objectives, and we were going to keep score by maybe where people were in the world when they were 30, what they had contributed to the world, and their platform for additional contributions. Given that students have another whole journey that I didn't have in my generation of navigating their 20s, why would we say our work's done when they're 22? And so this whole period of navigating your 20s I became very interested in terms of, what can we learn about it? What decisions are they making? How could they contribute to the lives of my current students and vice versa? And that's how I created that course.
And how long have you been working on that course?
I've taught it twice.
Oh. On a macro level, what do you see as the most significant world challenge that you'd like to see addressed or solved?
Well, I think it's given my interests, mm-hmm. it's how you get every person in this world to be thinking about contributing to the lives of others and acting on that. So it's this idea of people being enterprising. And we have a new initiative that we're working on at Duke. It's kind of a simple idea, and that is, it's called the Little Idea Project. And it's how do you get students to come forward, not with problems. I don't need people to tell us about problems, with little ideas to make Duke and their Duke experience better. And you just do the math. If you had 6,000 undergraduate students, if half of them came up with one idea a month, and you implemented 30% of those ideas, you can just see what would happen to the culture of people thinking about, I can make a difference, I can act on it.
Mm-hmm. Given your former role as the executive director of the Robertson program and the fact that you still teach at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, we have a question from Greg in the audience. He says, thanks for doing office hours, Tony. You have ties to both Duke and University of North Carolina. Who wins on Saturday?
Oh my goodness. Well, I love my experience at UNC, and I have deep respect for both universities. And but I did start my college career at Duke, mm-hmm. and so I think Duke's gonna win. Mm-hmm. But I have great respect for UNC.
What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a book about motivation and overcoming problems, and how you can be resilient and act and continue to be motivated.
Mm-hmm. And what have some of your favorite books been over the past 10 years that you would recommend to viewers?
Well,
if they're interested in social entrepreneurship.
My favorite books would be cookbooks, because I love to cook. So mm-hmm. I love to buy a cookbook and actually read a cookbook, and mm-hmm. Teddy will get on me because then I'll rip out a couple of recipes and put them in my pile. Mm-hmm. But so I'm interested in current events. I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in leadership. I'm deeply interested in student development and leadership development, and so because I have the best job at Duke, and because I'm so passionate about my work, much of what I read is work related because it's just so interesting to me.
Given that you're so interested in leadership, when people say that there's a lack of leadership, a dearth of leadership in the world today, how do you respond to that?
Go make something happen. Be part of the solution. It's not about better leaders. It's about exercising leadership. If you're the equivalent of a walk-on basketball player on a basketball team, think about how you can contribute to the team. And
what do you think are the most essential qualities for a student to be competitive in the 21st century in terms of being a leader and being successful?
Well, it's going to be action-oriented, isn't it? It's going to be this combination of reflection and action, and which means you have to be acting on passions, which means you have to know your values. So, the challenges are great, and for you to find the energy to reach out and exercise leadership and act, you've got to know yourself, you've got to want to do it, and you've got to be able to see that there can be some kind of little result. So we might call it grittiness, we call it self-knowledge in terms of knowing yourself, but it's always a focus on action and results, and then the learning that comes from that.
So I would assume you're a believer in lifelong learning then.
Lifelong leadership, lifelong learning.
It's constantly evolving. You never quite reach a position where you are an expert on leadership per se.
I'm not even close to being there, and I'm getting pretty old. So, you can always get better.
Another question from an audience member. Elizabeth asks, does Tony keep a long-term interest in the projects he launches with students? And can you give an example?
Well, yeah. I mean, we have this semester is next semester is the 10th anniversary of the Durham Giving Project, which is a project that the students started about a house chorus where students raise money and then create giving circles and give the money out to organizations in Durham. And so I sent out an email last week to the three founders, Sarah Hawkins, Melanie Oberman, and Mandy Anderson, and they're going to come back in and become re-engaged. And the question is, how do we all work together to take the Durham Giving Project to another even higher level? So these projects, I say to my alumni, once you have me, you're stuck with me forever, and we continue to be very engaged in these projects. We have a high sense of ownership in them.
How do you continue to engage alumni? What kind of activities do you do to keep them engaged?
Well, we're always looking for the silver bullet, the easy way to do it. But I visit 7 or 8 cities a year to meet with alumni, and I'll have 30 to 40 alums show up in every one of those meetings. I'll send out periodic newsletters. We engage alumni in on our projects with our current students. I field a lot of phone calls from alumni about career decisions. I write a lot of recommendations to alumni. So there are multifaceted ways that we do it. But I just gave Liz Linzer on my staff my photographs of my alums, and I knew every one of those faces, and I know my alums.
You've been at Duke for several years. What's been a particular Duke moment that you might never forget?
Oh, boy. I think the way that Duke welcomed me back when I came back from the Robertson Scholars Program in a very difficult economic time was kind of special to me. And I have a whole series of moments. I don't have one big moment, but I tell people I've got the best job at Duke. I'm very grateful and I'm very fortunate because I can define something that interests me, create a course around it, act on it without forming a committee, engage students in it, and we actually might go make a little difference in the world together.
A follow-up question to a question I asked earlier. Tanya asks, can you share with us the title of the book that you're currently reading?
No, because I don't remember book titles. But I'll give it forward.
Well, on that note, that concludes this session of Office Hours. So thank you so much, Tony, for being here this afternoon. A recording of this conversation and many other videos are available on the Duke On Demand website. That's ondemand.duke.edu. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a great weekend.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.